Welcome everyone back to Inference Swap at InferenceSwap.com. My name's John Pappas. I hope you enjoy the music in the background. That's Junction 715. They have all this music out on Junction 715 and YouTube, and of course on Apple Music, Amazon, iHeart Music. Anywhere where you can get music, you can hear their music. So go check them out. Today we are brought to you by Barney's Hub Bootery, 1198 North Main Street here in Crown Point, Indiana. It's the one-stop shop for all your shoe needs for the whole family, and they will put your shoes and service you right there in the store, and they're safe and friendly, wearing masks and all those kind of things because they love people and they do a great job. So support local businesses like Barney's Hub and Bootery and go there at 1198 North Main Street. Also, thank you guys so much for listening to Inference Swap. You know, we have a website as well as a YouTube channel, and you can go there and check out and now see as season 2 starts, me live doing this podcast live on YouTube, live on our Facebook page. So go there and subscribe on each one of them and you can get this. And also we have a Podbean app. So all that is you go to your app store on your phone, you can get an app called Podbean where you can look us up, Inference Swap, and you can get not only our podcast, but all podcasts. It's one of the biggest podcasting platforms in all of the U.S. and all of the world, if that matters to you. But why it's important is you can go there and you can become a premium member. If you want to do that on the Podbean app, you can do that there. If you want to do it on our website at InferenceSwap.com, you can do it there. But you can also interact with us and we can get some feedback, and we'll start reading some of that feedback here on the podcast. So go find the Podbean app and look us up at Inference Swap and become a subscriber. And also, you know, like we do have a website where you can become a premium member also on the app itself. And that app and that premium membership allows you to special resources that will help you in your discipleship goal and in your thinking process when it comes to the message of the gospel, and in light of it, how we should do that. Now, one of the great things that we have on there is the book, Screaming in the Wind is the Religion of Christianity Actually Keeping People from Christ. We've put that out in chapters. I'm getting ready to release it in the entire book on that premium membership wall. So get behind there. It's only $10 a month and you keep us alive and you support this ministry. So I'm grateful and thankful for those who have been doing that. Believe me, I have a new book coming forth that is going to be crazy good. I'm working on it right now. I've been working on it every single day, even through the holidays here. And it's going to be about the parables of the judgment and in light of that, how we should be. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. So, before we get that, I want to welcome you. My name's John Pappas. Welcome to Inference Swap. We are, I guess, sort of that place where you come to learn about what discipleship is, about some of the presuppositions we bring to the message of the gospel. And I was thinking a little bit about sort of the reality of what this channel is about. And I find myself going back not to methodology, which most people want methodology, you know what I mean? Most people want a way to do things, and they want to do that in inclusion with the religious systems they have in place. And I want to tell you, if that's you, unless you get over that hump, unless you get over that idea, you're going to struggle with discipleship. You will always pull people back to the ritual rather than the relationship that can be had in walking discipleship out. And so one of the things I want to encourage, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about, is the message of the gospel until it just sinks in and motivates you into understanding and moving your feet into discipleship in the real world. Now, we've contained discipleship into Bible studies and into institutionalized structures where discipleship in the New Testament was something that they lived. It's something that they, in light of the gospel, went out and lived before all the people. And so I want to encourage you to just think about what I'm saying. And so I'm going to be sort of breaking down some of these ideas that we carry from church world into the real world as far as our understanding. Whoa, I just kicked something. Sorry about that. As far as our understanding about the gospel and some of its doctrines that sort of take us in the wrong direction. Sorry, I just took a little swig of coffee. Hope you had your coffee this morning as well. So what are we going to talk about today? Today I want to talk about this concept that Christians take concerning judgment. And I want you to think about what you think about God's judgment. What is God going to do? What has he done? What is he doing? What will judgment look at? And when I go into my little diatribe that I'm going to start to go into here really soon, I want you to think about how that theology plays out in how you view your friends, how you view your daily life, how you view your work life, all of it, how you separate structures in your life, categorize friendships, categorize all the things that are in your life as religious, non-religious. We don't purposely go, okay, this thing's religious, this thing's non-religious, but instead what we do is we just categorize our life based on those things. And so I just want to encourage you to be open to what we're going to talk about today, which is judgment. So when we think about judgment, and here's my diatribe for today, we often think about right-handed powerful action that rewards righteous people and punishes the wicked. That is what we've always sort of believed in our upbringing in church. It's a right-handed power, a swift action by God that's going to happen one day that will reward the righteous and punish the wicked. But in Jesus, we find the message of the gospel is in complete opposition to that kind of thinking. So there you go, right up front. I just throw some cold water on you, right? We find that Jesus chooses the opposite in left-handed methodology as a way to pull off his Father's plan of reconciliation. And so instead of a swift, right-handed action that rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked, we find the Son of God in favor of actions that indiscriminately exalt the last, the least, and the lost, and the little ones. He literally challenges our thinking about those that we would punish and about judgment through his actions of grace, and he levels it all through his resurrection from the dead that was once and for all his creation. Now, just as what I just said probably challenges what you believe, it challenged what they believe. And we find this documented throughout the Gospels. As early on in Mark chapter 3, think about that, as early on as Mark chapter 3, we find this scripture. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against Jesus on how to destroy him. Now, the reason why that's important is because Jesus challenged the status quo. But imagine a Christian leader today challenging the status quo. What would happen to him? I can tell you that because I have challenged the status quo, what it does is it puts you on the outskirts. They will be nice to you, but they just won't grant you acceptance in any way of powerful position or leading or any of those kind of things, because they don't want the status quo to change. They want the people outside their buildings to change, you see? And so in the case of Jesus, we find he is constantly challenging their systems and their theology, and we find that they're constantly trying to entrap Jesus and confront him all the time with some of the things that he says because of the things that he's living before them. So it seems that Jesus was literally and automatically a danger to everything that they held dear, everything that they exalted as on par with God. And what's puzzling about this is Jesus really didn't do anything per se to endanger them. He just confronted their thinking and it shook them. I guess what he confronted the most was their eschatology, which it's the part of their theology that deals with death, judgment, and what happens to your soul. And the powers that be considered themselves experts in sniffing out heresy, just like today's leadership, because they're interested not only that you believe, but in how you believe. It's got to have a perfect belief and a perfect righteousness sort of ring to it, right? We have all these different denominations separate in their own ideas of what they think or how they think we should believe in Jesus and what they think is right and wrong, and they will exclude one another from their things that they do, their religious things they do. And by the way, the world doesn't care about those things. Only religious people do. And Jesus comes in and he just shatters it all. He shatters all of that thinking. But what we find as Jesus walks and challenges systems and thinkings, especially this idea of judgment, that the religious people always sniff out a threat to their system before the red flags are completely raised. Now, I want you to think about that. It's interesting to me how Jesus spoke to them harshly, but on a level field through the eyes of grace and death and resurrection, he was going to be that declaration of judgment, and therefore it was sort of them judging him more than him judging them. And I'm talking in matters of God's wrath. Now, that doesn't mean that God wasn't disappointed in what they were doing. I think for sure that comes out easily in Scripture. But when you look at the overall lens of judgment, it's them that are excluding Jesus, and people like the disciples and the women at the well and the tax collectors and on it goes. It's them that are judging on behalf of God, not realizing that judgment is found in Jesus Christ and him alone. Now, as Jesus begins to bring this message of the gospel and walk out the good news, the common people began to talk about him. And what they began to say, it was said that Jesus taught, this is Mark 1:22, as though he had authority. And then look at the comparison, not like those of the scribes or Pharisees. Well, Jesus was walking around healing. He was bringing good news. He was making those poor in spirit whole again. Those who needed physical healing, he was giving that to them, and he was giving them hope. And he was for sure doing the complete opposite of what the systems that were in place and the religious proclamations of that day were doing. There was a different result that he was getting than the religious systems and the political systems of his day. Yet the political and the religious systems try to come together and ultimately do come together to bring him to his death, right? They plot from the beginning. So he was for sure a threat to the power structures and the theology and their whole system. And it's why they came after him. Now, what we see is in Jesus, he provokes God's judgment right before their eyes, and that was namely that they could not even see what God was doing right before their eyes. And worse yet, he shows them that they didn't even want to participate in it. Now, anybody who's listened to my Christmas Advent, that's what it was about. Light came into darkness, and darkness could not overcome it, but light overcame darkness, right? And what it shows is we don't want God. We have a space in our heart we've carved out for our religious being, for our personal and selfish ways, and that space we rule. But it brings death. It brings darkness, something outside of light and life, which is Jesus. So that's from where their heart and judgment come. Our religion comes from our attempt to be approved by God. But Jesus brings God in that he is God, and he brings judgment and good news before the people and offers it up for free. Now, I don't want to just pick on the religious institution and even political institutions. When we think of disciples that were walking with him, think of all the things that they saw Jesus doing. They saw the justice of God right before them, and that he was bringing the least, the last, and lost of these in society, hope, mercy, and healing. But even in that, they were so religiously indoctrinated, and the hooks of religion are in mankind, they still waited on a Messiah to show himself in the way that their religious lens lent. In other words, I see them like I see many today. They loved Jesus. They stood up to their religious leaders because they were tired of being passed over. They stood up because they're tired of being looked down upon, or made to feel like they're not worthy of ministry, or incapable of doing it unless they have resumes, indoctrination, or they are made to feel unworthy of God himself. And so those kind of people share in the enthusiasm against people like me, or people like Jesus, or people in the Table Network, or that appear to be rebellious or call out leadership that way. But even having said that, there's a period of time when you come out of those things that you have to look past your own theological lens and strip it bare and read the scriptures for what it is, hearing what it says to us, not what we're bringing to it. And even in that, that's what the the disciples who walked with Jesus struggled with. Even when Jesus had died and resurrected, they still had the lens that the Messiah was going to overcome Rome, and that Israel would rule the world and be free over this new Messiah who would rule everybody, right? And how we know that is in Acts 1:6, the first question that they ask Jesus when he reappears from death, he resurrected at this point, they ask him, they actually come together and ask him and say, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom of Israel? And so it seems that neither the disciples or the religious people had it right when it came to Jesus and when it came to our understanding of God's judgment. Remember, all things have been given on heaven and earth to Jesus. Think about that. So what we find is the climax of judgment comes in Christ. And so I would suggest that as we look at even the landscape of the church, we find ourselves more receptive to a judgment as settling scores than to a judgment in accordance with the reconciling grace of Jesus Christ. How many times and how many sermons have we heard that are hell and brimstone that we find that literally blow up grace, blow it clean out of the water, and they immediately go towards reward and punishment instead of resurrection and divine pardon as the touchstone of judgment? Now, I have been a preacher. I don't consider myself a great preacher. There's a lot of people that can learn to speak really well, but one of the things I'm realizing is if I got to preach, that I could go up there and tell people with ease that God is going to get them, and I can go up there and tell them that he's going to reward the righteous and he's going to punish the wicked. And you can be sure if I do that, one, they're only going to believe that they're the righteous, but two, they'll believe every word I say. But what I cannot do, and that thing that will just draw out of an audience utter disbelief, is in my own sanity proclaim that Jesus has in fact taken away all the sins of the world, and that he has accordingly solved the problem that he once had with sin. It would be devastating to do that. It would be devastating to our understanding of judgment to do that, for them to actually believe that there is now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. Romans 8:1. Now, theologically, a lot of people see Jesus' teaching as an extension of John the Baptist, and it has this apocalyptic ring to him. But despite sort of that early fiery rhetoric in Jesus' teaching on these matters, we find that there's grace and abundance of grace in his teaching and his actions as well. For example, in the parable of the wheat and the weeds in Matthew 5:13, what we see, let's see if I can bring that up. I can. What happens if I go back here? I'm looking at something. Okay, very cool. So here, let me read this parable to you, and we'll just talk about it very slightly because I know we're running out of time here. So here's the parable of the weeds. And he put another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed a good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed seeds among them, among the wheat, and then he went away. So when the plant came up and they bore again, wait, I'm really hammering. I'm making fun of myself here because I can't read. I have some bad glasses on. Let me do that again, okay? The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in the field. While his men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came to him and said, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, then do you want us to go out to the field and gather them? And he said, no, lest in the gathering you uproot the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers. Gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burnt, but gather the wheat into the barn. Okay, so sorry, I have bad eyes, so sometimes I have a hard time reading, but that's the parable of the weeds. And so what we see from the beginning, and this is very important to understanding judgment, God's judgment, because, and I'm going to pause here in my thinking, because we don't think like this when it comes to judgment. When it comes to the parable of the wheat and the weeds, and I would say this for all the parables of the judgment, which we might go through, I don't know, not today, but throughout the podcast, because we want to get our gospel clear and precise and understanding, because we're proclaiming good news to the world, you see. So in the parable of the weeds in Matthew 13:24, what we see is a theme of inclusion, not exclusion. Jesus was okay with the wheat and with the weeds growing together, and did not want it to be the job of any of his servants to go pull those weeds. Think about that. He explicitly says that would be something he would do. Think about that. We are not in the business of correcting the morality of this world. We are in the business of proclaiming good news in spite of the morality of us all, even the religious. Let me tell you, and I know I harp on the religious versus the non-religious a lot, because we do things religiously that literally keep people from going to places to hear the gospel, because we've excluded the gospel from the world and confined it to the church, right? By some of our religious thinking, and this would be one of them. Jesus starts out with everyone in. For God so loved the world, he came to it, and he gave his only son for it. You get what I'm saying? We often think of God's judgment as separating the wheat in the weeds, and we think of ourselves as the ones to pull those weeds, or at least expose those weeds, right? So there's something else that Jesus is doing among us, and that something else is he doesn't separate eschatology and judgment from what he accomplished in his death and resurrection. And so we must see his judgment in light of grace, in light of his death and resurrection. So when it comes to God and judgment, we see that it has been carried out in terms of grace and forgiveness through Jesus' death and resurrection. Think about that. Just think about it. At the consummate moment of God's mysterious intervention in history, what we find is he operates by non-intervention, by a hands-off policy rather than a hands-on. On the cross, with the nails, through his hands and feet, he does all that he judges needs doing. Think about that. And he does it all by doing precisely nothing but dying. He just dies. He doesn't get mad at everyone. He doesn't accuse. Matter of fact, he says on that cross, Father, forgive them for they don't know what they do. And then he says, it is finished. Wow. He doesn't get mad. He doesn't get even. He just dies. That is amazing. So we see Jesus not take action on his creation for its sin, but in an odd and mysterious way, he takes inaction through his own death and resurrection, which will govern everything, which governs our thinking, which governs our idea of God's wrath and judgment. The fairest and most natural reading of all the parables, therefore, will be one that makes his death and resurrection the principal clue to what Jesus is talking about when it comes to judgment. It is a mistake for us to think that we can bring or already understand what judgment is all about, and that we are simply trying to see, when we read the parables of the judgment, that we can't read them in confirmation of what we think. We have to read them in light of what Jesus has done. So we have to come to them as the words of Jesus, who has spent weeks, months making death the principal device of his parables of gracious love, and who is now, under the compulsion of the same gracious love, about to die in order to activate the device once and for all. And you will see something new. You will see the gospel, not law. Good news, not bad. Vindication, not vindictiveness. That's what we will see. Isn't that amazing? So here we come to the key understanding of the parables of the judgment. We cannot separate what is learned from Jesus and his other parables, the kingdom of grace, the kingdom parables and the grace parables. The kingdom parables are about growing seeds and plants, all those kind of things that he uses, the metaphors. It's a mystery of a kingdom already planted here on earth, and that kingdom is at hand in Jesus Christ. It is a kingdom that has grown and prevails like a seed. It is sovereign and powerful and needs no one help for anything in order for it to grow. Now, grace is about selfless love, and death is about the mainspring of grace, lying down for a greater love. So, accordingly, when we come to God and his judgment, just as growth and mystery governs the parable of the kingdoms, and death and resurrection governs the parables of grace, so inclusion before exclusion governs the parable of judgment. Isn't that amazing? In almost every parable of judgment, we find people are already accepted and they disqualify themselves. In the parable of the king's son wedding, the guest was only cast out after being invited in. In the parable of the talents, we find the unfavorable judgment pronounced on the one who hid his talent in the ground was not based on if he earned his grace, but in response to what he did in light of the grace granted, the talent given. Acceptance was already in place. You see that? Isn't that opposite on how we grew up in church to think? You know, life is always full of us and them. I suffer from this myself. I always want to have an enemy to overcome and to plant my flag to say, look what I've done. You know? Now, one of my favorite quotes is by Robert Farrar Capon, and he says, to put it another way, heaven is populated by nothing but forgiven sinners, and hell is populated by nothing but forgiven sinners. The Lamb of God takes away the sin of the cosmos, not just of the chosen few. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all nigh unto me. Isn't that awesome? The only difference will be, will we receive the grace? This $1 billion gift in our pocket, will we even put our hand in our pocket to pull it out? So I want to wrap this thing up. I want to thank you guys for listening to my diatribe on judgment today. And in light of this, how will you look at the world around you? Will it be us and them? Or will there be another proclamation coming out of your mouth? In light of this, what is the good news? Can you even say it? Think about what I've said. Can you say the good news? Can you feel how good a news this is? It's just amazing, right? All right, well, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you'll listen to this over and over again. Welcome to Season 2 and our first episode on judgment and the gospel. I'm so grateful that you've listened to this. We will see you next week. We love you. I'm going to play you some Junction 715 on the way out. Be blessed, everyone. I'll catch you later. Bye. We'll see you later.
Wishing I was back where I began, back when I had a peace of mind. Give me back to a simple kind of life. I know I fought a good fight against my self-foolish pride. Take shot just to feel the burn. Teach my soul to live and learn. I've been feeling like dust in the wind, drinking from the bottle that's half full of sin, looking up when I should look within, chasing angels, demons won't let me in. Got me stumbling, hit my knees, bow my head to pray. Feel lost, nothing left to say. I've been feeling like dust in the wind, drinking from the bottle that's half full of sin, looking up when I should look within, chasing angels, demons won't let me in. Won't let me in. No salvation, preservation, work towards condemnation. Need redemption.